Welcome to this presentation. My name is Svein Tvedt Johansen, and I will be presenting the paper Place, Community and Strategies of Resilience in Small Arctic Companies. The paper is authored by myself, Yasu Tiru at the Alaska Pacific University in the United States, Trude Høgvold Olsen at the Arctic University of Norway, Hjørdis Sigursteinsdottir at the University of Akureyri in Iceland, and Marco Viero at the University of Lapland in Finland. Small Arctic companies faces a series of challenges, some of which are chronic in the form of remoteness and difficult logistics, harsh weather, others which are new in the form of global warming and the COVID-19 pandemic. And these challenges severely test the resilience of small Arctic companies and their ability to adapt, learn, and possibly bounce back from crisis and hardship. At the same time, small Arctic companies also share a common destiny with and tend to be deeply embedded in the surrounding communities. So the argument in this paper is that in order to understand firm resilience, we also need to understand the role it plays in shaping Arctic companies' resilience and the responses to hardship. And that's so we're interested in how place matters and fundamentally what places are and the role they play in shaping resilience. So the research question in this paper then can be formulated like the following. How does place shape the resilience of small Arctic firms? And the ambition in the paper is to develop a dynamic model that tries to link places and practices with resilience, which raises a question, first of all, what do we mean by resilience? By resilience, we mean a process by which an actor, being it an individual, an organization, or a community, builds and uses its capability endowments to interact with the environment in a way that positively adjusts and maintains functioning prior to, during, and following adversity. And there's a lot to unpack in that definition. First of all, in the definition we see resilience as a process as opposed to a quality of companies. It is a process, and we're interested in the process by which companies adjust. It also becomes evident from the definition assumes that resilience is a phenomenon or a process which can be studied at different levels. So we can study resilient individuals, we can study, as in our case, resilient organizations, or we can study resilience at the level of the community. And it also follows that it's a systemic. So resilience can potentially extend beyond the boundaries of the firm. More about resiliences in SMEs and some of the research that has been conducted on SMEs shows how SME managers often tend to see a tension between the daily operations of the firm, the day-to-day business, and planning for resilience. So very often small firms have a comparatively short time horizon and are not sort of conducive to, which is not conducive to resilience planning. The type of events that destabilizes small and medium-sized, or particularly small firms, tend to be shocks, not in the macro environment, but local, as in the form of a non-payment, the sudden death of a key employee. There is an emphasis, the literature suggests that there is an emphasis on pragmatism, agility, and the ability to think on their feet. Based on the work on Lenning, Hall, and Beck from 2005, we choose to differentiate between two types of resilience. The first type is what we refer to as absorption, which is in which firms invest in and develop site-specific resources to help them absorb shocks. So rather than sort of avoid, try to sort of skirt away from external shocks, the emphasis is on building resources that can help firms absorb these shocks. And we argue that in building site-specific resources, often tends to build strong links to a local community. So you develop social capital, relational capital, invest in employees, so as to be able to sort of withstand possible future shocks. So the emphasis here is on community, building a strong community and sort of developing the links between the company as such and a neighboring community. A second form and different form, and these are ideal types, you know, in the style of, as Weber would call them, ideal types. They're not, we'll find, they'll usually be mixed in some form. But the other type of resilience is what we refer to as adaptation, and which is where firms, rather than trying to sort of absorb shocks, tries to navigate away from or avoid shocks by emphasizing flexibility and agility. And in this case, because the firms try to be quick on the feet, there's a sharper distinction between the firm and the community. And rather than sort of invest in relational capital or social capital, the emphasis is on market transactions and having you know different a range of different alternatives and different suppliers, for instance. So that's two different forms of so how does places shape resilience, and how do they shape strategies of resilience? And in order to answer that, we first need to understand what a place is. And the first thing to note is that a place is distinct from any space or space. A place, according to Gearan from 2000, is a unique spot in the universe. So it applies a distinction between the here and the there. You know, it's not, it matters that you're in a specific place. That specific place has meaning. So places have finitude. They are nested, meaning that a place in some cases could be a neighborhood, it could be a city, it could be a county, it could be a country or a mountain. And in some cases, even the earth, depending on your perspective, whether you're meeting somebody in the neighborhood, or you're meeting somebody from the same city in a foreign country, or you're an astronaut viewing the world, the earth, from the moon. Your perspective shapes the notion of what a meaningful place is. So places are imbued with meaning, and as such could be contrasted with non-places, that is places of transience and anonymity in the form of highways, storage buildings, airports are often described as non-places. So places are important because they're capable of shaping collective action. They help, in some cases, spawn collective action, as where people tend to mobilize around places. They constitute grounds for identity. We identify with places, and we are self is shaped by, it helps shape a sense of who we are. It provides values, as when we try to, as when we evaluate strategies according to their effect on your local community. And they provide people with a common set of reference and enable a sense of collective sense making, in the sense that everyone can sort of work based on a common set of reference, being a community. Another term that we have to come to terms with is the notion of, if we agree that resilience is essentially a process which is based on human activity in some form. We've chosen to use the term strategic practices. So the idea here is that human activity, or as denoted as praxis, is embedded within a web of practices, with practices being routines, meetings, scripts, or other collectively shared ways of doing things. And these practices both constrain and in turn enable action. Now, what's interesting is that strategy as a practice, in the way we do strategy, is not just influenced by what we know, but is also influenced by material objects and materiality, or features of non-human entities or actants, as noted by Latour, 2005. So, for instance, being physically present in a community is likely to shape the way we think about strategy. So, looking over at a landscape or a newly built facility is likely to anchor the way we think about strategy, and what that strategy is likely to do to the community, how the strategy is likely to build on things you've already done, material objects that you already sort of put in place. So thinking is basically strategies, in other words, tends to be embedded and shaped by the material surroundings that the material surroundings that we live in. So this is the model that we then come up with. On the one hand, we have places and place identity, and we differentiate between SMEs that are strongly embedded in a specific place and SMEs that are less embedded, that have a weaker attachment to places. And we argue that depending on the firm's relationship to to places, and whether they have a strong attachment or a weak attachment, this is likely to shape the type of strategies that go into that give shape to resilience strategies. So it's likely to influence goals. Whether you're strongly embedded in the place is likely to influence whether your primary goal is to maximize profit, or whether your primary goal is to enhance your community, for instance. It's likely to influence the type of conversations people have. It's likely to influence the type of narratives that sort of form that shape strategic discussions. Is likely to influence routines and the content and focus of talk, in other words. So in this way, in a sense, places and people's affiliations and identity with places both motivates and constrain and enables search and conversations and create the context for strategic practices. And this in turn we argue, is likely to result in different types of resilience strategies. So embedded SMEs are more likely to we argue are more likely to adapt or be resilient in the sense of absorbing uncertainty and absorbing by building and investing in the community, because the community is community become the ends of the strategies. It's basically what the strategies is linked to, and what the strategy try to solve. On the other hand, in the case of non-embedded SMEs, we argue that non-embedded SMEs are more likely to deal with to be resilient in the sense of choosing an adaptive strategy. That is differentiating between a hardcore and adapting by changing, by seeking flexibility in terms of the type of transactional relationships that the company has to the external world. So rather than staying in the same place, they're more likely to perhaps move from one community to another community, or de-invest in a community and shift their investments so as to be resilient over time. But in contrast to the former strategy, this is not a place-specific or community-specific strategy, but a firm-specific strategy. And finally, we suggest that there is a feedback link. There's a feedback. Firms' experiences with the resilience strategies are likely to reinforce preconceived notions about what the purpose of the firm is. So success stories, site-specific strategies in which firms invest in the local community and successes associated with that strategy are likely to sort of reinforce a sense of self, a sense of place, which further tends to means that strategic practices are likely to be embedded, place-specific, and further reinforce resilience through absorption. Whereas in the other case, strategies based on adaptive strategies and strategies that founded on the notion of being agile are likely to reinforce that type of strategy by highlighting the prudence of being flexible and non-committed to individual communities or places. In the paper, we illustrate these strategies through a series of cases, 2 cases from Norway, 2 cases from Alaska, 1 case from Iceland, and 1 case from Finland. A Norwegian shipbuilding company, for instance, just celebrated its 100-year anniversary, and it's now owned by the 3rd generation. The company has had a tremendous development, starting with repairing ship motors and developing into design and construction of small ships, as in the form of live fish carriers used in fish harvesting and offshore wind for national and global markets. Financially, this company has just recovered from a major crisis in 2016 and 2017 and recently landed multiple new ship contracts. It employs approximately 70 employees, counting subcontractors, and including subcontractors, the number is probably more closer to 130, many of whom are recruited internationally. This is remarkable given that the fact is located in a tiny village with 400 inhabitants, about 50-minute drive from the regional airport. The shipbuilding company shows or illustrates a local investment strategy to build resilience by investing in local site-specific resources and investing in the local community. Such investments include investments in developing innovative technology, physical production space, relations and networks with research communities, investments in employees, and investments in the local community. The company engages actively in the local community, fronting concerns through letters to the editor and the local newspaper about ramifications of policy proposals, like the closing of a local school or a kindergarten, of whom the company is highly reliant. We have, for those of you who are interested in the other cases, I will recommend that you read the paper. Just some brief observations. The cases show, I think, illustrates that there is not a obvious or a clear demarcation between absorption, local community investments, and agility and adaptation. A lot of these firms have been agile. They have been, able to come up with new strategies in the face of COVID-19 on their feet, making quick decisions, finding new customers, new markets, but doing so largely the reason why firms have been able to be agile has been the fact that they have grown relational capital, they've grown social capital in a local community, which means that when COVID-19 struck, these companies were able to find new customers and ally themselves with local people quickly. So investing locally and being agile are not necessarily two opposing opposites in the real case, for some of these SMEs. As a matter of fact, social relationships and social capital, having strong growing roots in the local community, as shown in some of these cases, enable these firms to make quick changes in the strategy and adapt, and in that way be resilient. So what are some of the implications? Well, I think this paper is just in the very in the early stages, and we obviously need to do more empirical work to validate and develop and enrich the model. But one implication, which I think is noteworthy, is that it potentially challenges the conventional wisdoms about what constitutes good locations. Often we think of Arctic firms as peripheral and peripheral and compared to firms in other locations. Yet being peripheral and being in peripheral location and being isolated can also be in some cases coupled with a strong sense of place, in the sense that people, the company and the people who live there have a very strong identity and a very strong attachment to their community. And because because of the sense of place, and because the sense of place becomes a basis for a joint common identity, firms in these peripheral and isolated but communities with a strong sense of place may over time prove to be more resilient than firms in more central locations, which have perhaps a weaker sense of place. So, and it also suggests that in order to build firm resilience, we have to think about building resilient places with strong identities. So social capital, relational capital, not just in the firm, but between the firm and other people living in a location, and between people in that community, is likely to be important also, even for firm resilience. So that's another possible implication. It directs attention to how building firm resilience is likely to rely on building resilient places with strong identities. So that's the presentation. I encourage you to go and read the paper. And if you have any questions or comments, we welcome the comments both now at the Arctic Frontiers, but also in the future. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you again.